Hey everyone, Chris Aversano here, and before we dive into this episode of The Last Dinosaur, I want to give you a quick heads up. This episode was recorded before a live studio audience at the North American Maritime Ministries Association Annual Conference, which happened to take place on World Maritime Day. And I have to tell you, this was a lot of fun to do. Not only do you hear from our guests, but we will feature a few audience members as we have a Q&A session towards the end. In this episode, we talk about the often overlooked contributions of seafarers, the growing role of connectivity at sea, and how new technologies like AI and alternative fuels are impacting the safety and well-being of the people who keep our global trade moving. Our expert panel brings you unique insights from industry leaders like Simon Grainge from ISWAN, Chaplain DePooter from the Montreal Ministry to Seafarers, and Stephen Lyman from the Maritime Association of the Port of New York, New Jersey. Trust me, you're not going to want to miss this one. Also, a big thanks to Dr. Jason Zeidema, who not only is a big podcast supporter, but also he had the idea of recording a podcast with a live audience. If you like this content, please be sure to follow the podcast. Without further ado, stick around, hit that play button, and let's navigate the future of seafarers' welfare together.
So welcome back to the second session today. The first session, obviously, what a solemn moment to remember World Maritime Day. Pretty impressive speakers directly from IMO, from our partners in the ITF, from the U.S. Coast Guard. This one is equally impressive, a little bit of fun for me. I love podcasts, and we got ourselves a first here at NAMMA. This is not just a panel, but we're actually recording a podcast, and that is the Last Dinosaur podcast, hosted by no other than Chris Aversano. So thank you, Chris, for being with us. Chris has a day job, maybe, I guess. Yeah, he's an industry veteran, went to sea and works for Vesa Nautical. He also has this podcast where he interviews luminaries in the shipping world about the last dinosaur, and maybe will you explain that in your...
Yeah, thank you, Jason. And the Last Dinosaur concept started, I've been doing this for about 2.5 years, and it's a podcast where I talk about, it's a little, play on words. It's maritime shipping in the digital age, right? Because generally, we're kind of the last of the industries to really adopt to technology. And I talk mostly about the digital transformation, but I dropped an episode the other day with a woman from Bound for Blue, which is one of these hard sails that go on ships, right? So it's the whole gambit. I've interviewed Jason. I've interviewed Reverend Nesselhut as well, really to talk about the seafarers and how the impact of digitalization and the change in what we're doing is impacting them and their ministries, and for all the work that you all do.
So I'm going to get out of the way here in a second, and we're going to sort of start really recording. This will drop sometime.
Yeah, I'm actually hoping for, don't hold me to this, October 8th. I'm hoping if we get a good turnaround on the file, and I'll do the editing. You can get it Spotify, Apple, wherever. Just hit the little follow button, and then the like button is always nice too. On that. But I do a lot of my push on LinkedIn. So if you want to come up, I have my card I can share with everybody here later on.
So we'll do the recording first. After that, we'll have a question period, which may or may not be included in the podcast. Without further ado, Chris Aversano and the Last Dinosaur podcast.
Thank you, everybody. Good morning, and thank you again for joining us on, like Dr. Zeidema said, this very special episode of The Last Dinosaur. I'm excited to do this in person. Don't worry, we can edit everything. So if there's anything goes on here, we can edit it, and I can make you sound really good for a small fee, which I'll send you my Venmo later. Just kidding. I couldn't think of a better way to spend World Maritime Day than to be here with all of you, especially as we focus on the topic that's close to our hearts. Like Jason mentioned, I did spend time at sea, and I went to SUNY Maritime, and that's the seafarers' welfare. We heard some great panelists before. Every day, each of you make the health, well-being, physical, mental, spiritual of our seafarers your top priority, which I really appreciate because that gets lost often, especially when you're looking at commercial type things. And I'm really grateful for this opportunity. As we explore this year's theme of the conference, serving seafarers first thing first, it becomes clear that the future of our industry is built around the foundation of ensuring our seafarers are cared for in every way. Today's discussion will focus on the challenges they face and what lies ahead in their welfare, because the heart of this industry is and always will be, even though it may look a little different, like we heard earlier with some automated ships, will be the seafarers, and those are the people who are moving it. We're going to dive into some very real issues, including sea blindness. In other words, how despite the maritime industry's vast impact, it often remains invisible to the public. We kind of hinted on this earlier. We'll also talk about connectivity that has reshaped the lives of seafarers for better and for worse, and explore the vital role that communications plays in their well-being. And we're also going to talk about the essential aspect of safety, health, and the future challenges as new technologies such as fuels, like we talked about, be it wind and other things, start to emerge. Before we get started, let me just go take a minute here to introduce our panel. We'll start from the end and work our way towards us here, and we'll start with Simon. Go ahead.
Yes, hello, Chris. So I'm Simon Grainge, Executive Director of ISWAN. For those of you that maybe don't know ISWAN, we're probably best known for the Seafarer helpline that's been in existence for probably nearly 20 years now. It's a 24/7 multilingual, multi-platform helpline for seafarers and their families. We deal with all sorts of inquiries, right from is there a port welfare facility where I'm going, right through to somebody who's got suicidal thoughts and needs help. We take around 400 calls a month, and our team of operators are distributed around the world. We've got bases in the UK, which is where I'm from, in case you hadn't noticed with the accent. And we also have a team in India and the Philippines. And I'm relatively new to maritime. I've only been doing this job for 3 years. Before that, I was 20 years working in a number of different charities, mostly homelessness. And I've also worked in international development in South Asia. And then before that, my first career, I was a police officer in the UK for 20 years.
I'm Michelle DePooter. I am a chaplain with the Ministry to Seafarers in Montreal, Canada. I started as an intern, and what was supposed to be a 9-month internship has turned into over 24 years. So I have definitely seen a lot of changes as far as technology goes with the seafarers, and so I'm excited to share some of that today and have discussions about that today.
Look forward to it. And finally, Stephen.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Stephen Lyman. I'm with the Maritime Association of the Port of New York and New Jersey. The Maritime Association, we operate as a marine exchange. We've been around officially for 151 years, probably not as long as some of the seafarer welfare organizations that are in the room here. But we provide data on the ships that are coming in, arrivals, departures, and what's at berth. A big part of what I do on a day-to-day basis is advocate on behalf of the Port of New York and New Jersey. I've been in the industry for 15 years. My face is probably familiar because I was formerly with the Seamen's Church. Where's my peeps? All right.
So you got your shout
out. Marsh, working with Marsh back in the day, and I think I saw Father John somewhere, but I'm not sure if he's in the room right now.
That's excellent. And we have this great panel. What we hope to do is just kind of talk about how technology is impacting all of this, and not just technology, as it is in terms of digital software and everything, but this first question, and I briefly mentioned it in my introduction, is the concept of sea blindness. And this kind of has come up more and more. We kind of talked about it. I heard it spoke about a little bit earlier, and that is, basically the whole idea of our industry exists basically blind to most people outside of this room unless something bad happens. And Stephen, I'm going to start the question with you, and just for everybody else in here, it's going to be a little bit of a back and forth exchange between all the panelists. So Stephen, starting with you, as someone who's been in the operational side and the welfare side of the industry, how do you see this issue affecting the public perception of the work seafarers do, and what kind of things can you think of that can raise some awareness?
Sure, absolutely. So going back, my time at the Seamen's Church Institute, we really became kind of the center of the port for the public to come into. We are one of the places within the port that's not behind a gate. So a lot of the work that I was doing was not only as making sure that the lights came on at the Port Newark Center, but also a relationship manager with not only the port operators, but also the city of Newark and the public. Bring them down to the port. A lot of folks, we held an event at the Port Newark Center, and people from Newark came down and they said that they've grown up in Newark and never even realized that this was down here. So it's happening, 5 miles, if that, from here? And a lot of folks just have never been there. They don't know the impact of the maritime industry. Going forward, now in my current role, a lot of the work that I'm doing is talking with legislators, with folks that are down in Trenton, Albany, and also DC, and a lot of those folks don't really know about the maritime industry either. So we're doing a lot of public outreach, one, telling folks about the maritime industry, and two, how vital it is to our whole entire country and any country around the world. I do think that you need to talk about the maritime industry first before you start talking about seafarers to somebody that is not within the industry. So I think that seafarer welfare organizations like all of you out there, you have the perfect launch pad for talking about the industry and really advocating for the industry and why we need the industry and how important seafarers are.
Yeah, Michelle, would you like to pick up on that? Because I really think, you kind of go from just a general awareness about things, and I always joke, nobody really cares about ships or shipping until they run out of toilet paper. Right. I mean, we all saw this in COVID, and unfortunately, it only happens in bad times, right? We talked about the dolly earlier. We're talking about the strike potentially, which people will be aware of. It's the bad seafarers. That's going to be probably a perception that will be out there. And then, we talked about the Ever Given before that and things like that. So from a ministry point of view and from kind of how you do your outreach, how do you address this, Michelle?
Yeah, certainly. We see the same thing as well. There are many times where we will invite volunteers and supporters, even our board members, to come, and we'll give them a tour of the port. And so many times people who have grown up in Montreal will drive past a certain section in the eastern side of Montreal, and people were like, wow, I didn't even realize this was here. I've never been this far east. I've never been to this area of the city. And most people, when they think of the port, they think of the old port, where the cruise ships come, where it's very tourist, and they enjoy coming down and walking around, and they're like, oh, okay, that's the port. And then when we take them away from the old port, the tourist area, and into the port, it really opens their eyes as to all of the things that are going on behind the scenes that they didn't even realize. And to continue to be able to offer that opportunity for our supporters, for our partners, our interns, volunteers, church groups, school groups. We've done a lot of that, and just telling, especially educating people that this is an important industry, and without the maritime industry and the seafarers that run the ships, we won't have what we have, right? 90% of what we own and consume comes by ships. And when I tell people that, or ask the question of how much percentage do you think, or how do you think your new iPhone came here, most people don't realize it's by ship. So it's a lot of education that we try to do.
Yeah, imagine. Now, I'm the opposite. When I drive by here to go, my oldest daughter goes to school in northern New Jersey, and I drive by the port, she's like, Dad, you have to pay attention to the road. Don't look at the ship. So I'm kind of the opposite. But talking to you for a second, Simon, because you have a different thing. You're trying to raise the awareness of and help seafarers with ISWAN. How are the seafarers reacting to the fact that a lot of times most people don't understand what they do, and kind of adding to what kind of, maybe a little bit of their stress?
I think they're reconciled to it because everywhere they go, that's the response they get. And I think it makes them quite, in a way, it makes them quite tight-knit because they feel that they are part of a community that other people just don't understand, and they don't know what they do. But I think there's some contributory factors to sea blindness. If you think about culturally what kind of things we celebrate, in a communist country, you have those great heroic statues of workers, standing there with farming implements. Whereas we tend to sort of celebrate fame and fortune, celebrities, billionaires. In my country, we even celebrate kings and queens. So it's quite different in that sense. And also people in countries, they don't worry they do worry about what goes on outside their borders, but they don't really know much about it. So I think those are contributory factors. And the industry itself seems really reluctant to promote what it does, which is a shame, because when you think about it, it's a stunning example of international cooperation that manages to remain cooperative and works together through pandemics and conflicts. So it seems a real shame that that's not celebrated.
Yeah, I agree, and it does bother me a little bit when people talk about only the disasters or things like that, when instead of saying that, right here in the port of New York, New Jersey, how many ship movements go on every day? And nothing. It goes flawless. Yeah, there may be weather, there may be a delay, maybe you had a tug breakdown and you got delayed out of it, but in essence, it goes flawless, whether that's on the container side or I know there's some tank and some bulk and some other things. It just, what people don't understand, it runs like clockwork, and of course you're going to have problems. And of course now with social media, you see more of those problems than they would have been buried in the way back. For sure.
On that point, Chris, if I put my Marine Exchange hat on, we had over 4,000 vessels call the Port of New York and New Jersey last year. You only heard about the one that caught fire.
Right. You only heard about the one that caught fire, and that's just the way it is. You don't hear about the other 3,999 that just rolled in. They discharged a cargo. They had a crew change. They got stores, and they went on their merry way. Mm-hmm. And I think that's not only just here in the U.S., because we're looking at a North America type hat, or in Canada, but certainly in other parts of the world, it happens all the time. And I think sea blindness is not just a U.S. type thing, for sure. Pivoting a little bit, one thing that is helping, I think, at the end of the day, seafarers, and it has a little bit of a double-edged sword, and I'd like to talk to you about this, Michelle, is connectivity. And how that's starting to change, how that is improving, but maybe has a little bit of a double-edged sword. And by the way, Michelle, please tell us how you got your start with connectivity, because we were on a prep call, and Michelle told us great stories about being like, Jason mentioned about being like the most prolific seller of SIM cards on the planet, which is a great thing. Talk a little bit about connectivity there.
Like I mentioned, connectivity has changed an awful lot since I started. When I started, calling cards were kind of available, but they weren't very reliable, and it was still, in many cases, to many countries, cheaper for the seafarers to call directly. So they would come to our Seafarers Center, and we had timers. We would make the calls for them. We would time them, and then charge them per minute. So they were paying $1.25 per minute to call India, for example. And many of the people, they didn't have phones at home, so they would make a 1-minute call to the store by their house and then come out and they say, I'm going to call back in 10 minutes. My friend is going to get my wife. And then 10 minutes later, they would come back again and make a call, and it would last for maybe 5 minutes, 10 minutes at the most, because it was expensive. And then within a very short period of time, within, I would say, 6 months to a year, the calling cards became a lot more reliable, more popular. They started becoming cheaper, and we started selling the calling cards. And then a few seafarers discovered that they could buy prepaid phones, not SIM cards, but actual phones. And every 3 weeks when the ships came to Montreal, they would ask me to help them top up these phones. And so I was actually buying phones for seafarers, and then as well as the phone cards. And then it moved to the SIM cards and the phone cards. And then just the SIM cards. And many of the SIM cards, especially in Canada, settings had to be changed. And yes, I sold many, many SIM cards and activated many, many SIM cards, to the point where, for example, a Russian seafarer could come to me and have trouble with their settings, and his phone was in Russian, and because I've done so many of them, I could change the settings on his phone even when the phone was in Russian, which I do not read. Yeah, yes, exactly. And so seeing all these changes, and now with the Wi-Fi and the internet on board the ships, the first ships that started getting the internet on board, they were very, very excited because now they could contact home easier. I was on a ship a month or two ago and talking with the captain, and this was one of the first ships that had free internet for all of the crew, that one of our regular ships in Montreal. And unfortunately, they've not really updated their system. So I was sitting in the mess room across from the captain. He was planning to go out, and he was asking for my WhatsApp number in case he had trouble when he was going out and needed, directions to get to the Seafarer Center or something like that. So I gave him my number. He's like, okay, I'll send you a quick message so that you have my number. He's sitting across the table from me, and he could not get a network. He had to go up to the bridge to send me a WhatsApp message while I was sitting on the same ship, trying to use the ship Wi-Fi. And comparing that to other ships that now have Starlink, where seafarers are telling me, yeah, they can just call their family. I was on a ship a couple of weeks ago, and the captain and the electrician were talking about the new iPhone. And the captain's son wants an iPhone 16. The electrician, he said he had bought his wife an iPhone 14. And as we were talking about it, his phone rings. He steps out of the room, comes back 2 minutes later, like, yeah, that's my wife. She just told me she doesn't want the iPhone 16. She's going to wait for the iPhone 17. Which the captain and the electrician then assured me that, no, she actually does want the phone, so the electrician had better go and buy it when they're in Montreal next week. And so just that very big change where the electrician's wife could call him and he could have a 2-minute conversation with her, and it wasn't, they could have the conversation, they could get their discussion done very quickly, the same way that all of us do with our families, and then they could go about their day, which is very different. Another thing with some of the ships that have Starlink, they get a certain amount of data per week for ship and crew entertainment. So some of the captains have bought projectors and screens through us from Amazon, and they set it up in the crew recreation rooms so that every week the captain is very intentional of gathering all his crew together and streaming some of the latest releases of the movies from their countries, which I think has been a great opportunity and an encouragement. I think it's an important thing that when we go on board, to encourage the captains who have these capabilities to use them to get the crew together, and if there are ways that we can help that by ordering the projectors and the screens for them, I think it is a great way for them to continue to have that connection with each other, but at the same time have that continued connection at home.
It goes a far cry from when I was a cadet on an MSC ship. It was my birthday, which is, and I'm allowed to say, I guess I'm always allowed to say whatever I want, but it was a holy day of obligation, and I'm Catholic, and it was August 15th, and we were in Sicily, and I think I was overserved, and I came back to the ship, and the captain said, "You have to call your parents." This was in 1991. He dialed the phone. He goes, and sound normal. So I talked to my folks and things like that. But what was interesting, it was a 10-minute satellite phone call message, which probably $10 a minute. Now, they didn't charge. It was that, but it was that sort of thing. And yeah, it was 30 plus years ago, but that's not that long ago if you really think about it. Simon, wanted to pivot to you because of what the work that you guys do. Connectivity must be a benefit, do you think, of kind of being able to talk to folks, or is there sometimes a little bit of a double-edged sword there?
Yeah, connectivity is incredibly important, and when you think that we live most of our lives online, it's almost a basic human right these days. It's certainly an expectation. And so, great, some companies are now making it much easier for their seafarers. But at the same time, I think there are downsides. And the first of that is regular communication with family all the time. So you're still 4,000 miles away, but you're getting to hear about everything that's going on at home, good and bad. You can't be there. You can't be part of it. What kind of impact does that have? I remember spending 6 months in Pakistan without my family, and it was a weekly Skype call, and I used to get really excited about the prospect of being able to speak to my wife, family. And then if it was one of those calls where They were just unloading about all the things that they were struggling with. By the end of it, I was glad to put the screen down and actually regretting that I'd made the call, because I'm powerless. I can't do anything about it. So I think that's something that families and seafarers themselves need to learn. We're running a bit of an experimental program at the moment, working with families to try and help them understand what's good communication and what's not so good.
I think it's really important because Mark Nesselhunt and I, Reverend Nesselhunt, we talked about that on our podcast about some of the issues around communication and how difficult that is. We were talking about seafarers on the western rivers here in the United States, but how difficult that is, hearing a piece of information or hearing something about, I think in this case it was a family member, and you can't do anything about it. You're on a tug and barge somewhere on the Ohio River, and you can't, even in the United States, you still can't do much about it. Stephen, just a little bit on your end there. I mean, communications and connectivity, getting kind of more information faster, but how do you guys view it in what you're doing now, and then even in your past roles?
Thanks for the question, Chris. So now, operating as a marine exchange, I'm sure that everybody here is well aware of marine traffic. You go on marine traffic, find out where the vessels are. But the reports that we're providing actually consolidate all of the information across several different methods, calling agents, calling the Coast Guard, calling the pilots to see when vessels are going to be arriving. A lot of that has changed, definitely. There are other marine exchanges now that are running actual AIS sites, and they have AIS radars that they're utilizing. They have their own that they've built out. My cohorts in Philadelphia at the Marine Exchange of Delaware River and Bay, the CBP actually go into their system in order to enter in clearances. So they're really bringing the port community together in order for goods to move and consolidating all of that under one resource. We're looking at options like that as well, how we can do that for the Port of New York and New Jersey, and it's baby steps.
Well, it's funny, you talk about AIS data and putting on my job hat. I'm a product manager. We sell a product that in a way kind of competes with marine traffic, and I sell it mainly to kind of the commercial front end folks, and that only tells half the story, right? Because you could see the position where it is. You don't know anything about it. I deal mostly with the bulk side, so you don't know if that ship sitting in I live in Connecticut, up in New Haven, it's discharging, does it have a next voyage? You have no idea, and that's kind of where you get something like Marine Exchange or something else can really be additive. So I always caution people, like, yes, AIS data is very good. It's better than where it was 10 years ago or certainly 20 years ago.
Chris, I think there's another downside to connectivity as well, is the impact on basic social interaction on board.
Yeah.
And I think anyone who's got a teenager will be able to relate to this. The fact is that seafarers disappear to their cabins because they've got calls. I was on board a vessel, and there's a guy who, at the right time, he will go and spend an hour on the screen because his children are going to bed. It's very important to him. But you need teamwork on board a vessel. That's where your safety comes from. You need to understand who your colleagues are. You need to know something about them. You need to care about them in order to be able to be an effective team. If connectivity gets in the way of that kind of social interaction, then it's a problem. And we did a study involving 20 vessels where we actually were really interested to see that regular events like barbecues, some kind of watching films together, actually had a really positive impact on how people felt. And I think we shouldn't overlook that.
Right, and I think it gets to, we talk about, there's a lot to be said about corporate culture and things like that, but, you look at ships, you actually have to live and breathe it because it's 24/7 for 365. And what you were saying, Michelle, is something that sounded as a positive, that hey, we're going to go out and get films from India, from Ukraine, from the Philippines, and we're gonna watch these things together or have it available. How has that played so far in terms of what you've seen? Is it something that's been really positive? Have crews embraced it? And talk a little bit about kind of like that balancing act, because if they're doing this, then they also may have that connectivity that could, let's say, get in the way.
the ones that I've seen, it has been positive, but I think it does come from the culture, both of the shipping company, where they encourage that they provide the funds for crew to do things, and for the captains. And I've seen this before, even before the connectivity issues. Even when nobody had any internet on board, there were certain captains that just said, "No, I don't do parties. If you want to do something, you can have something in your cabin, but there will be no parties. I will not provide anything for it." And so that really hasn't changed. If a captain is interested in getting his crew together and interested in that, he will do that. He or she will do that. If they aren't, they're still not going to do it. And I think it needs to be an encouragement both from the company side, as well as people are moving up in the ranks, to have that as part of the culture, where they are, in a sense, responsible for helping to get their crew together and providing that leadership.
Well, and I think that goes into a little bit what we heard earlier about kind of the crew shortage and no, I don't want to work at sea. Why do I want to do that? Like, and if you have somebody who did that, and unfortunately I never sailed with any of those captains. We always had parties, and I was U.S. flag, Jones Act, so it was okay. But you could definitely see that impacting. And then why would I want to sail? And I think, to Simon's point, it gets into a safety culture, right? Because it all kind of it's a circular thing.
On that point, it's encouraging to hear that the connectivity has gotten better. I have been out of the seafarer welfare for about 6 years now, but it's encouraging to hear that more vessels have connectivity. And in my day-to-day, we've heard about the mariner shortage, and we're trying to see what we can do to help with that. So we're actually working with the New Jersey Community College Consortium to build a program for mariners to get an associate's degree and then carry that over to one of the schools in New York, in order to try to get more students into the field.
Yeah, that's a whole other thing. Yeah, I think I heard a similar study. It was the average age of a U.S. mariner is 50-something years old, and the average age of a U.S. steel worker in the shipyards is 60 plus. So, we'll actually get to that in a second. But I want to continue with you, Simon, and we're talking about World Maritime Day, navigating the future. Is the overall theme. Safety first. You've mentioned the study that you just did, and when we were on a prep call, we talked a little bit about another study that you did with future fuels, and talk a little bit about like kind of the seafarer's perspective on all of these changes, whether it's fuels or the digitization, because really what's happening. It's great that we have future fuels. It's great that we have wind sail. It's great that we have all these cool things that could keep our CII rating. I'm sure you guys know what that is, a good rating in A or B. But that information has to get off of the ship. And I heard something, and one of my podcast guests said that 90% of the information that is gathered on the ship doesn't get off, which means that people start to figure that out. It's going to be more information getting off, which more on the seafarers. Talk a little bit about your study on future fuels and kind of how that can give us a glimpse into what's going on.
Yeah, sure. We were picking up on the helplines quite a few calls, concerns from seafarers about the future, worried about the technology, would they be able to cope? And I was also very struck whenever I went to events, there were big discussions about decarbonisation. It's always the number one subject, but everything was about the technical aspects. Nobody was talking about what it means to seafarers. So we launched a survey with seafarers and shoreside as well. We've got about 500 responses. And it was interesting to see what came back. The seafarers actually, there were lots of them were saying actually they were proud to be at the forefront of decarbonisation. They thought it was important. They wanted to take part. They were positive about it. But they did have concerns. They were concerned about safety. What would be the implications? They were concerned about training, how they would get it, who was going to pay for it, when it would happen, how was that going to happen. They were also concerned about fatigue, the increase in workload, because they could already see that happening, the types of documentation that they have to fill in, the additional stress of that. Also, they were concerned about if something goes wrong, who takes responsibility? And where will that blame lie? And real concern for their own personal selves there. And we've had calls where people have actually said, I'm doing stuff that I don't really fully understand, but I don't feel confident enough to actually say because I'm worried about that I might lose my job. So there's all those sorts of things going on. And I think it also leads into another issue, which I think is about the whole thing about technology and the impact it's having. It's great. It's a wonderful tool for people, but technology should become a servant. But we usually end up, it enslaves us. Mm-hmm. And I think, we have to think about the seafarer of the future. They're going to be a small human cog in a massive machine. So where does that leave them? What does that do for the human spirit? And I think that's where the men and women in this room play a crucial part, because actually people still have to be reminded that they're human. And in that kind of environment, I think they're going to just become more and more isolated.
Yeah, I worry. When I hear talking to some folks in the industry, maybe I'm more on the technology side, what they come back to, they kind of keep that in their mind, but they say it a different way. They say, whatever we create, especially with AI or other things, it's always human in the loop. What do? We got to keep human in the loop. Michelle, in your dealings with the seafarers on a day-to-day level, and as you start to see ships get progressively more advanced from a technology point of view, whether it's more software or more hardware, scrubbers, you could just go on, the litany of things that have changed really in the last 5 years, and this idea of fuels. We heard earlier about fuels. What's it going to look like? Will it be ammonia? I had the same reaction that one of the panelists had, like, I don't want to touch ammonia, like, no way. But as you start to hear about how it's handled, maybe it's not as what you think. On the front lines, how is that being, how are you seeing the reception there?
I've heard some of the same comments that Simon just said, with concerns about training, when they're going to be trained, how are they going to be trained, will they know what they're going to do, and also the fatigue factor. That has definitely come up in discussions that I've had with seafarers, where they're telling me they're already exhausted, depending on what ports they go to. If they're doing the Mediterranean, they're in ports very frequently. They don't have that much time for rest hours. And if they have to have additional whatever for future fuels and alternative fuels or wind or all of these things, they're not entirely sure how they're going to get the time and energy to do all that on top of what they're already doing. So those are some of the discussions that I've had with seafarers. As far as additional technology on board, I had a conversation with some ships where their companies are now telling them that the captain and the chief engineer need to join daily Teams meetings with the office. And they were required to buy their own equipment for this, but the ship didn't allow any. They blocked all the USB ports and all the computers on the ship, so they couldn't actually physically plug in an external camera or microphone. And so there were all these issues, but the company said, no, just buy the camera and the microphone and join our daily Teams meeting. And the captain was telling me, it's just, why? I have many other things to do. I don't have time to do another Teams meeting daily with the office. Just let me do my job. They have enough information. They know where the ship is at all times and what time the cargo is finishing and everything. And it is becoming, some of that technology is becoming overwhelming, and the fatigue factor is huge. That's one of the things I'm hearing.
I could just imagine. I mean, I don't even like going on Teams meetings if I can avoid it. I don't know how all of you out here feel, but that could have been an email, I think, is the saying. Stephen, from your point of view, in the port, obviously more technology and more information is good, but kind of how do you balance that a little bit with what with some of these other concerns here?
Well, it's interesting about the alternative fuels topic. We're talking about that at a port level, and what is our current infrastructure? What are we able to accept? Oh, and by the way, LNG is illegal in New York. You can't move LNG over the roads, and that also carries over to the water. So if vessels are calling New York and New Jersey, that vessel is obviously going to have to come into New Jersey, and hopefully they can get bunkering for an LNG vessel. So we're looking at all of the alternatives that are out there. You have ammonia, methanol, LNG. We're already providing diesel and biodiesel here, so that's pretty cool. But all of these other alternatives, what are the ship owners doing? What type of builds are they going after? Are they going to be doing dual fuel vessels? Can we accommodate those dual fuel vessels? So we're opening up those conversations and bringing in those port stakeholders to talk about this.
Right, and we'd even talk about like the whole plugging in, cruise ships plugging in and having to switch off and do all that, and with the ports that we have here in this area.
Yeah.
As I wrap up, I'd like to kind of pick up on that theme, and I'm going to start with you, Simon. And I always like to have a forward-looking question. Are you hopeful that we can kind of, at the same time, move towards improving seafarer workplace safety and everything else in the theme, and at the same time continue to adopt technologies and connect? What's your kind of feel? Are you hopeful for that, or are you like, man, we have a lot of work and we haven't even thought about that yet? What's your feeling from where you sit?
Yeah, I'm an eternal optimist, and I think things can change. It's an industry that really the only thing that's going to make change is commercial pressure. And the issue about recruitment and retention of a future workforce is what will force the issue. I think that's what will make the change, because companies will recognize that they're going to have to change the way that seafarers are treated, the work conditions, because otherwise they're not going to be able to find the people that they need. So I think that's a really significant driving factor for change.
Yeah, Michelle.
Yeah, I'm also an optimist, and I have seen a lot of changes in technology and connectivity, and I think that's been a good thing. At the same time, I think especially as those of us who are chaplains, ship visitors, in our seafarer centers, to be able to continue to go on board the ships and provide that human element to maybe change the way we do things. We might not need to sell SIM cards anymore, but that doesn't mean that we don't have a reason for going on board. And I think maybe we turn a little ways into maybe offering more events or things that actually bring people out, because they have the connectivity on board the ships. Maybe our seafarer centers and our presence is more that human element now.
Become event planners.
Maybe not event planners, but just to provide a place of connection for the seafarers, and listening to the seafarers, what they have to say, and then also advocating for them for their best interests.
And Stephen, I'll finish with you. Same question, but obviously looking at your unique view of having some time on the seafarer side and now on the representing the port side. How do you think this is going to, or are you hopeful for this sort of balance?
Yeah, definitely. I am definitely very hopeful for this sort of balance. We need to adapt, right? And the only way that we're going to be doing that is through collaboration and communication. Keeping those lines of communication open with folks. Everybody has a bad day, but you need to know who that is that you're going to call when there is a bad day, just in case you need support for something. And I feel like seafarer centers and seafarer welfare in general, they are those people that seafarers do call when they have a bad day. Yeah, it might be happening while they're in transit, but once they're in port, you guys are the people that they call in order to help with that.
Yeah, I always stress that to everybody. Even at where I work now, I sit on a team, a corporate social responsibility team, and I give a lot of hey, I know it says Seafarers Missions, but they do a lot of work that is not necessarily missionary work. It is literally the work that our HR team does in support, and that's what trying to get to folks who are outside the industry is super important. Well, I'm going to open up the floor. Jason here can go on. We're going to, hopefully, if the microphone is good, we're going to include your questions. So think twice. Like I said, we're going to keep these questions in here.
Mark Wodka with Canaveral Port Ministry. This might be a Coast Guard question, but so it's very complex to me to be adding all these different technologies. Who is overseeing this? What trial done? Because I'd love to have the opportunity to encourage seafarers that are facing going on to a ship that's using alternative fuels, for example, that it's sound. You know what I mean? Because there have been plenty of, I think, examples of new technology that's being pushed rather hard, and then find out, oh, there's a weakness there, or you can't charge electric vehicles in certain temperatures. You know, there's some major pitfalls, and when you're at sea, it could be life or death.
I think that is a IMO or U.S. Coast Guard question. I do know in talking to ship owners and other folks that is very much kind of on the forefront of their mind. A lot of times when you talk about the adoption of technology, especially what you're talking about here, there's generally a very controlled sample at first. I had one ship owner on, even he was just talking about adding Starlink. And he said, I think his fleet was 60 or 70 ships, been around forever. And he said, no, we're going to put it on a couple, and we're going to see what happens. So I think, again, you're talking more about a regulatory, this is a volunteer type thing. But I think a lot of it is trying a very small sample. I dropped a podcast with a woman who did the hard sails, and she said she went on one ship and rode the ship with them, and it sounded like maybe some technical managers, okay, put the sail on. And then, oh, look, it works. And then put it down, and then, and then get feedback from the crew. Because it is ultimately safety. I do think that it's easy to put software on ships, but certainly when you talk about hardware, alternative fuel, I don't know what you guys are hearing, but I can tell you, I think it becomes regulatory, and then companies, especially those that are a little more advanced, it may be kind of suggested now, but certainly they see the commercial impact of Fuel EU, which starts next year, EU ETS, which is the trading schema on carbon, which started this past year. Owners, their livelihood are dependent on it, so they want to make sure they get the right choice that's safe, that their crew can do, that ultimately they can benefit, but ultimately the seafarers benefit as well, because if there's no compliance, then those ships, their trading life go away. So it's this fine balance that I'm hearing. I don't know if you guys want to add anything to that there.
I would just say from the seafarer perspective, what people were saying to us is they need to be involved in the discussion. They need to understand what's actually happening out there. They need to be consulted. I think that's how you win people. That's when you win people along, isn't it? You involve them in the process. And one of the recommendations of the report is that the industry should take steps to make sure that seafarers are involved throughout the process.
Yeah, and it sounds like the folks that I'm talking to, definitely are involving, the seafarers at what level. I never get to that granularity. That could be probably something I explore along the way, and love to share.
I have a question. I was talking to one of the engineers lately, and his ship's only 5-6 years old, and we started talking about alternative fuels, and he said, I don't think my company's going to want to spend the money on a ship that's only 6 years old to upgrade this ship or buy a new ship. Are we going to have to just only trade with countries that aren't going to acquire alternative fuels? Who's going to come up with the money? And there again, he said, you don't have alternative fuels here, what are we going to do? So he really was excited, or what's going to happen to his future. He didn't know if he's going to have a job. Oh, I'm Dan Stover in Mobile.
No, that's. I think it's again the same sort of questions that you hear about. It's very similar to the last one, and I think ship owners, what's happening at kind of a ship owner level and industry level is they're realizing they're going to have to retrofit, otherwise the ship becomes less tradable in certain arees. How often that is, or do they have to take a less freight rate, or do they pay a tax? Ultimately that does go onto the consumer, but how that's going to look. And I think to your point, we talked about this on the panel, here in New York, LNG is not allowed.
Right.
So that does become a huge issue. And then you talk about things like, oh, we're going to have ammonia. Okay, great. Where's the infrastructure? And right. I think that those are some of the big questions that we're starting to see.
100%. And I think that both questions that were asked, they're kind of an onion, right? Because also if you're talking about international vessels, they have rules. And then you come to the U.S., and then there are new rules. So striking the balance, we're still trying to figure that out. I don't think that we have a definitive answer on all of that yet. Some of the questions that I've been toying with, what comes first, the green corridor, or do we have to have the infrastructure for the green corridor first? Like, in order to push the infrastructure to get there, do we sign up for a green corridor between ports? Or if we can't service the vessel here, then are we going to lose our market share, and that vessel is going to go to another port that it can get serviced?
Father Sandy Sears from Port Everglades, Florida. My wife would agree with that name. It's a great name, The Last Dinosaur. She says, I am. So what I want to talk about is connectivity. And I hear captains they decry the fact that the crews are not cohesive, they're not together. I understand as far as the cellular or lack of cellular for the ship. And part of our ministry, we give out hot spots and help with that. But at the same time, we organize karaoke and we organize board game nights and silly things like cornhole and such on board the ship. And I remember visiting last year a car carrier crewed by an entire crew from South Korea. And the captain said, I hate to restrict cellular use, but I can't get the crew together. So he's organized a band. He says it's the most god-awful band I've ever heard, but it keeps the crew together. Because we know the fact that crews don't have the time, they don't get into port, they don't go out drinking and carousing and having that good time together. So they do want to stay in touch, but at the same time, they're not together.
Yeah, it's definitely something, Michelle, I'd love to hear your opinion on that, because that is, I remember my sailing days, and they were short. We did go out. It wasn't drinking, but you would go out, and we would go to port. Actually, I used to go to Port Everglades all the time, and go down to the beach for an afternoon. It's fantastic.
And I think what you said is right, where the captain's saying there's not enough cohesion, and so he did something about it. And I think that's the big thing. It's the captains and chief officers or people in the company that recognize that this is an issue and then do something about it, like getting the band together, or on one of my ships where they've been ordering guitars and drum kits and everything and sending it to our Seafarers Center, because also they recognized that there were good musicians on board, and they got together, and the chief officer showed me some videos of their parties, and it looked like quite the party they were attending. But it was because the captains really recognize that this is an issue, and I think that's something that we can encourage when we go on board the ships, to ask the questions of, okay, now you have connectivity. How much data do your seafarers get? How much do they use? How good is it? And are you having parties? Are you having get-togethers? And if not, then okay, let's talk about how this might be a better way of doing it, and if there is anything that we can do to facilitate that, whether it is to say, look, we offer package delivery. I can order something for you and bring it to you the next time you come in, and things like that. I think it's a recognition that yes, it might be a problem, but also saying, oh well, it's a problem, we can't do anything about it. That's not the answer. It's encouraging the captains and companies to see that it might be an issue and to do something about it.
I would agree with you. I think that definitely, to use your words, I would encourage the cheese. Like, do the cheesy things, get the people together. But I think that there's also a component of incentivizing that, right? If you win at Cornhole, you get a $10 gift certificate to Amazon, and whatever the case may be. But I think that is encourage the cheese.
Yeah, encourage. That's a good one. I think I'm going to use that quote here as we wrap up. I think the one takeaway out of the many is, don't forget about the human in all this, in all of our technology, and we love to embrace it, and it's easy for us to embrace it. And I think we mentioned here, surly teenagers. I have a couple of those at home, so I know exactly what you're talking about, but they do come out of that, and they're not operating a ship, so we do have to make sure that we encourage this with everybody. I also learned something in my 30-plus years of shipping is you don't keep people hold people up for lunch. So I think we're done. Thank you again, Jason, for inviting me on and to record this really cool podcast here, which, like I said, hopefully will be out on early October. Follow the podcast, please. That's a little plus button wherever you listen. And thank you for the panel. This was really engaging. And thank you, Jason. And thank you for everybody for all of the work that you do with the Seafarers, because without them, none of this really works. So thank you.
Thank you.